Okay, in this video we are going to talk about the different strategies that we have in English to place emphasis on part of a sentence, on the part of the sentence that we'd like to emphasize, to highlight, okay? So there are many strategies in English. We've already talked in class about inversion. We are going to revise it in the first part of this presentation. We are going to learn about cleft sentences, okay, where we divide the information of a sentence in two in order to place emphasis on the first part of the sentence. And there are many other strategies that we are not going to deal with today, but I'm going to mention them here. One of them, as you know, is when we use the auxiliary verb to place emphasis, to add contrast. For instance, we are having a conversation and I say, I talked to the president, and you say, no, you didn't. And I say, yes, I did talk to the president. Okay, it's contrast and it's emphasis. Okay. We have already talked about in previous classes the use of so and such for emphasis. So those books were so old, or Patty had such a great voice that she won the contest. Okay. And last but not least, we have the use of the word indeed after an adjective. Okay, so although he is 50, he looks very young indeed. Okay, and indeed is for emphasis of the very young. Okay, so let's move on to revise inversion. Okay. The first thing that we must remember is that this is a structure that is used especially in formal or written English, okay? So it's, if we use it in everyday language, it sounds unnatural, okay? So we'd like to keep in mind, to be aware of the register, okay? If you are giving a lecture and the context is formal, of course you can use inversion, okay? But not, for instance, in an informal email to a friend. Okay, so as you probably remember, there are many adverbs and adverbial expressions that are negative that we can use at the beginning of a sentence and that would be followed by inversion. Not only, never, no sooner than, hardly, rarely, only then, scarcely. And then we have only when and not until. I will later refer to why these two are slightly different, okay? But right now we are going to pay attention to what do we mean by inversion. What we mean is that we are going to change the order of the subject and the verb. So if the subject is number 1 and the verb is number 2, usually in a positive sentence, in a statement, we are going to have 1, 2. That's going to be the order. But when we do inversion, with the aim of emphasizing, placing emphasis, remember that's the function we are learning, what we do is the opposite. So instead of using the number 1 subject, number 2 verb, here we would do number 2 first and then number 1. So instead of saying my brother is not only lazy but he's also very selfish, if we place the adverbial phrase, the adverbial expression at the start of the sentence, not only, then that is followed by inversion. Not only is my brother lazy, but he's also very selfish. Okay? So this is the case, for instance, with the verb to be, where the verb doesn't need an auxiliary verb. Remember, when you make a question with the verb to be, or you make a negative sentence, you don't need an auxiliary verb. Okay, so that's how you do inversion, same as in a question. Okay. But what happens with the rest of the verbs where you don't need to use, you need to use, an auxiliary verb? So what do? We use the same structure as in questions, auxiliary subject verb. Okay, so for instance, if the sentence is, I've never heard such a ridiculous argument, and you want to do the inversion, you take the adverb at the beginning of the sentence and then auxiliary subject verb. Never have I heard such a ridiculous argument. Okay? Another example. If you say you forgot not only to shut the window, but you also forgot to close the door, you take not only to the start of the sentence, and then what is the auxiliary verb you would use for questions and negatives with the verb you forgot? Is did. So not only did auxiliary use subject forget verb, not only did you forget to shut the door, but you also forgot to close the door. Okay? So that's basically it. I mentioned before that only when and not until are slightly different. Why? Normally, if you use an adverb, the inversion follows the adverb straight away. Okay, so never had we seen, or no sooner had I sat. Okay, but with only when and not until, because these are followed by a subordinate clause of time, only when we had read his biography, the inversion goes in the second part of the sentence. Did we understand him? And not until until is again a time linker, so it's followed by a time clause. Okay, so not until you become a parent yourself do you understand what it really means. Okay, auxiliary subject verb, but with only when and not until in the second part of the sentence, preceded by that time clause. Okay, hope that's clear. Let's move on to cleft sentences. Okay, so we are going to talk about 3 types of cleft sentences. The first type is when they begin with the word what or the word all. The second type is when they begin with the word it. And the third type is when they begin with one of these phrases, the thing that, the person who, the place where, the first time, the last time, the reason why, okay? And what's going to follow is a relative clause. Okay, so let's start with the first type. With all I need is a small piece of paper. So if you say, I need a small piece of paper, emphasis, all I need is a small piece of paper. Okay? I didn't like her dress. All I said was that I didn't like her dress. And same with what? What I found strange was that there were so few people there. So the sentence would be, I found it strange that there were so few people there. But if we want to place emphasis on the fact that I found it strange that there were so few people there, what do we say? What I found strange was that there were so few people there. Or what really annoyed me was that they didn't apologize for being late. Or what you need to do right now is sit down and put your feet up. As you can see, The first part, we've divided the sentences, as I said, in two. That's what clefting means, separating two parts, dividing, okay? And the first part of the sentence and the second part of the sentence in this type of cleft sentences is linked by the verb to be, which is underlined here in the presentation. Okay. So, what we have after the verb to be can be a noun or a noun phrase. So, what he misses are chicken curries. Or what he wanted was peace and quiet. Or what I really am is the mother of 3 kids. Okay? But we can also have a verb. And that verb is going to be an infinitive or a bare infinitive, infinitive with to or infinitive without to. So what he hopes to do is get work. What Jack did was set up a scheme. What travelers are doing is escape from the rat race. Okay? So, as I said, usually what you get after the verb to be is an infinitive, okay? So here in orange you have the way the verb do is in the first sentence. Here we use infinitive because we have the modal verb should, infinitive because we have the modal verb need to, and infinitive because we have can. So what do we use after the verb to be? Same form as in the what clause, as in the WH clause. Okay, so we use the infinitive. What you should do is write a letter to the manager. What I need to do is get some rest. What I can do is call for a taxi. But what happens, if we have in front of the verb to be a WH clause, a what clause, where the verb do is in the ing form. So what we do in the second part of the sentence is to have an ing form as well. So what they were doing was arguing about which train to take. What I am committed to doing is having a long-term vision. What I dread doing is writing emails. Okay, so we adapt the second part of the sentence, the verb in that second part of the sentence after the verb to be, to whatever precedes the verb to be. If in the WH clause we have infinitive, here we keep it infinitive. If in the WH clause we have ing, here we keep the ing. Okay, so those were the cleft sentences beginning with what and with all. Now we are going to move on to the second type I mentioned at the start, which is the cleft sentences beginning with it. Okay, so it is his charm that appeals to people. Okay, here we have it at the beginning of the sentence, and we have that a relative clause in the second part of the sentence. Okay, what do we mean? That it is his charm and not other traits of his that appeals to people. Okay, so it is his charm, not his intelligence, not his money, not his wisdom. Okay, it's his charm that appeals to people. Same here. It was the weather that put people off. Okay, it was the weather, not the crowd, not the price. It was the weather that put people off. Okay, it was his optimism that I fell for. It wasn't the fact that he was attractive. It wasn't the fact that he was rich. It was his optimism that I fell for. Okay. And it was Billy's teacher who realized he had potential. It was Billy's teacher. It wasn't his mother. It wasn't his father. I want to emphasize that it was Billy's teacher. I want to place emphasis on that part of the sentence And that's what I do with this structure, okay? And the third type and last type is, as I mentioned at the start, the one starting with a phrase and followed by a relative clause and a linking verb, which is the verb to be. So the thing that amazed me was the fact that people stopped for pedestrians at crossings, or the person who I like best, or the person that I like best, or the person I like best. The brackets mean this part of the sentence is optional. Of all my relatives is my Aunt Emily. Or the place where we stopped for lunch was absolutely beautiful. Or the first time I met her was at a conference, or the last time I saw her was at a conference. Or the reason why she left her husband was that he cheated on her. Okay? So cleft sentences are very common, not as formal as inversion. They are a way of adding emphasis that you can use in everyday language as well as in formal registers, okay? And that's all for now. What I'd like you to do is the questionnaire that follows this video on the platform, okay? Thank you.